Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another BC Poly Hotstove. I'm Jordan Bateman, Communications Director for the ICBA, and Maclean K, Editor-in-Chief of the Orca, joins us live from Victoria. Maclean, how are you?
I'm doing very well. Another beautiful day in our province's capital.
I'm just grateful you didn't fire me after last week's show, that you've had me back on for the Hotstove Part 2.
Well, I'm on record as saying that unless you're talking about your song, in which case I am on record as saying that you sing like an enchanted nightingale.
Oh, my word. Yes, it was. If you've ever wondered if the Orca is fake news, that is the greatest example that obviously we are. I don't know. I wanted to write something about municipal candidates. Being an old retired township councillor in Langley myself, I just got to this event in Langley where. You can just feel the angst in the room because there's like 15 people in the room who are running for office, and there's no information, no polling, no one knows how they're doing. They're just like all nerves, and they're asking you like, what do you think's going to happen, as if you have any idea better than them. By the way, Maclean, I just lied to all 15 and said, "Oh, you've got this locked down." You got it. Totally. All I'm hearing is good things about you. You got it locked down. And then,
you have to say that to candidates, though, right? Like, what are you going to say? Like, things are bad. You should fold your tent. Stop knocking on doors.
Yeah, I mean there's nothing worse than being in a campaign where you just know and feel you're drawing dead in the last week. And I imagine there's a few municipal candidates feeling that right now.
Well, no, don't listen to Jordan. You're well in the lead. You just need to knock on a few extra doors if you're watching, and
don't stop
that
working.
seat on council is waiting for you at the other end of the tunnel.
You're just 2 points down. Just keep working. No, but so I went to this event, and being the retired council club, it feels good. Nothing is better than being a retired politician at an election time. And so then I got thinking about what I'm going to look for on my ballot. The kind of people I'm going to vote for in Langley Township. And that led to that piece, which led to a song, which led to my wife saying, that was surprisingly joyful and optimistic of you, Jordan, which was kind of a side compliment, I guess.
And speaking of getting fired, I didn't realize until a couple days later when I looked back at the piece, we didn't actually specify that it came from Mary Poppins anywhere in there. You mentioned Michael Banks, and to me, I certainly knew who Michael Banks was, but it was a couple days later that I thought, if you didn't know who Michael Banks was, you'd have no idea what the song is. That's
true. Well, there's the new Mary Poppins coming out this fall, or this Christmas, so it'll be all right. It's okay. And the reason Mary Poppins was on my mind was because my daughter was Mary Poppins in the play in the spring, so I've had these songs rolling around my head for months now. But nonetheless, enough of that. Let's talk BC politics. Here on the Hot Stove, we like to talk about what's on the front burner, what's on the back burner, who's hot, who's cold. Let's start with the front burner. Maclean, I think we've already kind of touched on it. What is on the front burner politically right now in BC?
Right now, it's municipal politics, and I mean this in a general way. There's a lot of. Let's set aside the implications and who your favorites are and all that kind of thing for the moment. But let's just soak in for the fact that there's a very competitive race in Vancouver. There's a very competitive race in Surrey. There's a competitive race here where I live in Victoria. Democracy is alive and well at the municipal level in British Columbia, and I think that's a good thing.
It is and it isn't, though. I mean, you talk to some of these northern mayors. I mean, Laurie Ackerman was a guest on the podcast. Now, Laurie's an excellent mayor and well worth a vote. The problem is no one can vote for her because she keeps getting acclaimed. No one.
That's true.
There are no campaigns there. It's the second straight election where she's been acclaimed. We see this a lot in a number of northern communities. More and more acclamations. The 4-year term has really made it more difficult for people to enter the public service there. It's kind of like there's a tale of two BCs almost.
That's true. I mean, if you're in Fort St. John and you think that Laurie's done a good job, what's the solution, right? I mean, it's hard to convince somebody to run just for the sake of, helping Laurie stay fine-tuned, right? I mean, there's not an immediately obvious solution that presents itself, at least not to me.
Yeah, no, that's true. And look, in Langley, there's a sitting mayor and then a couple of very long shot candidates running, and you kind of wonder what the point of that is as well. Municipal, you're right. We didn't talk about Nanaimo, where I'm not sure the race is so interesting as the fact that that's a city hall that desperately needs a steady hand and someone to clean house, because what a mess Nanaimo. One mess Nanaimo's been, one mess Victoria's been, one mess Surrey's been, one mess Vancouver's been. Like, Talk about the spreading creep of poor mayoralty management regimes. We've certainly had it here.
It does seem like Nanaimo is sort of on another level in terms of some of the mess that's happened there. I mean, it's been ugly, and I mean, again, not to jump ahead, we were talking about the front burner. The back burner is for me the Nanaimo election, because again, let's set aside the fact that it's a competitive race, which it is, and let's set aside that it's an important election for Nanaimo, which it is. This is probably the only municipal election in British Columbia that could potentially bring down the provincial government. If Leonard Krogh is a candidate, and he is, I don't know if he's a front runner, but he is certainly probably the favorite right now, and he's also a sitting member of the BC legislature for the NDP. And should he become the mayor of Nanaimo, he will have to resign his seat, which will open a by-election. And again, this is a lot of and maybes, but if the BC Liberals should win a by-election, and as we know, governments don't tend to do very well in by-elections in this province, should all those things happen, then we're back once again to a tie between the governing BC NDP and Greens and the BC Liberals. And all those discussions we had before Darryl Plecas became Speaker, where the Speaker would have to break ties, we're right back to where we started. And it might end up with the provincial government falling before anyone intended it to. So yeah, that's a pretty important municipal election happening in the Mid-Island here.
Yeah, the ramifications are huge. And we didn't even touch on the fact that I hear, being a Valley guy, persistent rumors in the Fraser Valley that there's a very credible recall campaign organizing on Darryl Plecas. Can you imagine if in the middle of all this, the Speaker, the tie-breaking vote in the House is recalled? My God, I can just smell Rob Shaw and Richard Zussman writing a sequel and making a fortune on another bestseller.
They better start writing already. Now, I mean, the recall campaigns are designed to fail in this province, but I have heard rumors of that as well. And I have to think, if there is any electorate which might consider, because they're angry at their MLA, it might be Darryl's writing. And again, whether you think what he did was right or wrong, the fact is that I think a lot of his voters are upset, and but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, and it's not even that they have to be angry at Darryl. They just have to be angry at the NDP and want to bring them down by any means necessary. So lots to watch for there. Point. You mentioned the front burner municipal politics. We're going to come back to that several times in the show. My front burner issue, though, right now is cannabis. And this, I think, stems from the work we're doing here at ICBA with a number of, a couple thousand companies, employers who are members and clients of ICBA. I think it's Wednesday or Thursday next week?
Tuesday.
Tuesday. Oh, my gosh.
Yeah.
Line up now, people.
It's literally 4 days from now.
4 days from now, cannabis will be legal in Canada. Different regimes in different provinces, but it will be legal. And Maclean, I would say that this is the most significant public policy shift probably since Prohibition.
I mean, I can't think of anything that would even come close. I mean, unless you're talking about conscription.
Yeah.
I mean, the ramifications of it. There was a piece we ran from our own Ada Slavinsky talking about one aspect, which is literally, I don't know a lot of people would have thought of this, but it's advertising and sponsorships, which, alcohol companies can do and tobacco companies can do, but there are some pretty strict regulations around that. What's going to happen with marijuana? And the answer seems to be nobody really knows. I know this is a very small aspect of what's going to happen on Tuesday, but it just goes to show how many sort of other ramifications and details and all these things that we have to collectively sort out.
Well, I mean, Jay Inslee was in town, the governor of Washington State, making a deal on some border issues. You have Michael Farnworth talking about at least a dozen pieces of legislation that have to change in order to embrace this. You have companies trying to deal with drug and alcohol policies. And look, just because cannabis is legal doesn't mean, especially if you have a safety-sensitive job, it does not mean you can show up, with drugs in your system to work. And there's going to be civil liberties things that spin out of this. You have Jody Emery and Mark Emery, very concerned about the smaller growers being lost in the shuffle. You have former Liberal cabinet ministers lobbying, repping, working for these big pot companies. Like, it's unbelievable. And you look at some of these big media organizations, Globe and Mail, for example, Toronto Star, they've actually hired, dedicated pot reporters because they realize just how huge this beat's going to be.
Well, I mean, even before it's legal, I mean, we all know the size of the industry, I think especially here in BC. To me, it's no different than the Calgary Herald having an energy reporter. I mean, this is a huge industry. And I mean, again, it's not like they just legalized oil in Alberta. So like there's a whole process that we have to go through here. One of the other things you didn't mention that's not happening at the government level is this debate is happening in strata councils across the province, because now they're given the ability to treat marijuana like tobacco, which means they have to decide on bylaws whether or not they're going to allow it. So, I mean, this debate is happening across the board in society, and it's all happening at once.
Yeah, there was a church groups. My wife and I are ministers who do weddings, and we're affiliated with church groups. They're coming up with policies, right? Because all of a sudden this is legal, but is it ethical? Is it moral? There's all those religious questions as well. Like, this is going to spread its tentacles and reach out and touch everything. I guess edibles aren't legal for another year after this point. So,
it's so complicated, and there's so many different jurisdictions that I will admit I've lost track, and not having a lot of direct personal interest in that particular aspect. But I do know that there's there's been a lot of debate in Mike Farmer's ministry about things like how they're going to police public intoxication with edibles and things like that. And the short answer is they don't know that they can.
Yeah. There's the driving prohibition. It's going to be really interesting to see. And then what do you do with all these people who have criminal records because of minor marijuana offenses? I mean, they should be expunging those. That's a whole nother layer. It'll be very interesting to see what happens there. So cannabis, it is funny to watch, 50 and 60-year-old white guys talk about marijuana. And I have to say, I am already exhausted. I mean, completely exhausted by these stupid headline puns and leads, about buzzes and high and all that stuff. So. Well,
don't look at any of the headlines Wednesday morning, because you will not like what you see.
That's right. Okay, this is good now. This is good to know. Okay, on the back burner, you mentioned Nanaimo fallout. I'm going to mention proportional representation. The municipal election is October 20th. That is exactly 9 days away from today. 2 days after that, the ballots go in the mail for proportional representation, because the NDP are trying to confuse the issue essentially and get this through. They're in a real rush to do it. I can tell you that, I think the prop rep support is dwindling. The trend lines certainly show that in polling. My sense is that as people start to figure out that there's a fast one trying to be pulled on them here, that they're going to be less likely to support this. But then again, I mean, what normal human being is out there thinking about prop rep at this point?
Well, certainly not until the municipal elections are over, I don't think. But, and I mean, in one respect, if you're going to vote for proportional representation, you have to vote for three things. You have to vote first to get rid of the system we have, and at the very least are used to, whatever you think of it. Second, you have to vote for one of the three systems and be comfortable with your choice. But the other thing you're sort of implicitly voting for, if you're going that way, is you're endorsing the way we're going about this. And I think that there are people who may feel that proportional representation or some form of it might be worth a try, but are not happy with the way that the NDP have gone about this. I mean, they've reversed themselves on a couple promises they made, not least of which was having a single question on the ballot, and they've left a lot of details till after the fact. So, I mean, I can certainly sympathize with somebody who thinks that proportional representation is worth trying, but also is horrified at the way that the process has unfolded here.
Yeah, not to talk about your colleagues in the press gallery, but I find them to be a fascinating microcosm of British Columbia in this, because, a number of the reporters have been critical on Twitter of the process. And, if you kind of read between the lines, it sounds like they're not going to vote. If they vote, they're not going to vote to change it. Then you have Gary Mason at the Globe and Mail, who, would sell his soul to Satan in order to get prop rep. He just loves it so much, it doesn't matter what the details are. Brett Menier is another guy from Kamloops who, even though proportional representation, frankly, is going to be a disaster for communities outside the Lower Mainland, going to wither their representation and virtually guarantee MLAs from the Lower Mainland representing far-flung places in British Columbia. He's all on board on it, and it's like a personal offense. He can't fathom the fact that people like Bob Price, who writes for the York, or other people wouldn't be just in love with prop rep. So it is interesting to see that. The problem is, Maclean, they're the only people talking about this. the media gallery. Like, it didn't come up at Thanksgiving at our house.
No, I mean, I saw that debate about whether or not we should be talking about proportional representation at Thanksgiving. We certainly did not. And I don't think that makes us not engaged or abnormal. We talked about things that matter within our family.
Yes.
Not that the proportional representation doesn't matter, but I think for a lot of people, this is just not something that they are interested in talking about in these settings. And that's not a bad thing. But it also sort of illustrates, I mean, you mentioned that this issue is on the back burner. It's been odd watching this fundamentally important debate happen sort of, not on the front pages. It's kind of on like A6, A7 at best. And as somebody who cares deeply personally about this issue, it's been at times frustrating. But I mean, it's hard to compete with the new trade agreement with Mexico and everything Donald Trump does, and a federal by-election in Burnaby and the municipal elections. I mean, there's so much going on right now. And by the way, the largest private sector investment in Canadian history. That happened too.
Yeah, you're exactly right. So it'll be interesting to see what prop rep, the turnout in this thing. I'm just, I expect it to be at, Nishka horde levels. Like it's going to be a small turnout on that.
And I think everyone can agree, whether or not they support proportional representation or not, the absolute worst scenario is if we have something like 40-45% turnout and 51% of that 40% vote to change the system, and then we're staring down the barrel of we have something like 20% of British Columbians have voted to change our system. And I mean, that is, again, even if you think it's a good idea, and fair enough, that is not a mandate, and that is a difficult thing to carry forward if you're the NDP.
Yeah, and in fact, it opens it up to a major Supreme Court challenge, because the Supreme Court's been clear in the Quebec separation case that you have to have a certain threshold in place to do a major radical change to a governance system. Whether it's Quebec separating, whether it's the way you elect MLAs, you've got to be able to defend that. All right, that was my back burner prop rep. Your back burner is the Nanaimo fallout. Do you really think the BC Liberals can win Nanaimo? I mean, Mike McDonald says no way.
Well, I think ordinarily, yes, it would be extremely difficult. That's been a tough riding, but it's been a tough riding because, I mean, if I can praise an NDP member for a moment, Leonard Krogh is an institution in that town. I don't even know when he was first elected, but it's been a long time. And I don't live in Nanaimo, but by all accounts, he's well known around town, and full credit to him. If he's not that guy anymore, if it's somebody new, and the NDP does have a tendency to embarrass themselves in nomination meetings because the person who succeeds Leonard Krogh has to check a number of boxes. And again, whether you think that's a good idea or not, fine. But the last election, there were several examples of some candidates getting into fights and claiming some rather strange things. So there's a path forward where the NDP can sort of shoot themselves in the foot. And also, I mean, historically, correct me if I'm wrong, I think only twice in the history of this province has a governing party won a by-election, and both of those times were the premier, Christy Clark, and
Christina
she was a pretty
Joan
good
Clark,
campaigner.
Yes, Christina Joan Clark, I believe, was the one who bucked that trend.
So I mean, I fully.
But never before has so much been on the line as in this by-election.
That's true.
I mean, the NDP are going to throw everything. They'll build 3 Nanaimo hospitals if they have to in order to keep that running, right? Like,
and I also suspect that, like, if the polls are not looking good, then I'd be shocked if the Green Party even runs a candidate. I mean, that makes things more difficult as well.
That's a good point. You think? I know there's 2 schools of thought. One is Krogh wins on the 20th, resigns on the 22nd of October, and Horgan calls a snap by-election. Basically for 28 days later. The other theory is, no, he'll go through the fall session, he'll get through budget, take the full 6 months before he calls it, and it'll actually be 7 months after and through the spring session. Any friendly wagers on that you want to make?
I cannot imagine a universe in which the Nanaimo voters are going back to the polls till after a thrown-in budget. Those are the only 2 set in stone chances for the government to actually fall, because those are the only 2 mandatory confidence votes. I just don't see enough upside for Horgan to call what would be in effect an early election when he could drag the puck. And I mean, it's not even abnormal to wait the full 6 months to call a by-election. So I mean, it's not like he'd be setting history there. I just don't see him gambling when the margins are so thin. until after the budget and throne come February. But that's my opinion.
I agree. They'd have to have a superstar candidate in the wings, and by all accounts, there isn't one. So I don't see it either. I think you're right. I think it comes May or June. For sure. All right. Politicians who are hot right now. I mentioned mine, Laurie Ackerman, mayor of Fort St. John. Man, I've known Laurie for a few years now. I don't think I've ever seen her as ebullient in an interview as she was with Rick Clough on the Orca today. She's just, thrilled to death about the LNG Canada plant, which, a lot of people are like, LNG Canada, it's in Kitimat. It's like an entire province away from Fort St. John. But as she says, FSJ puts the NG and LNG. And for that city, it is a stabilizing, long-term oil and gas play that should be able to survive the ups and downs of the energy market. And it really puts Fort St. John in a strong position, not just for the next 5 or 6 years, but for the next 40 or 50.
Well, and to your point about it being a province away, that sort of shows you the scope of the investment we're talking about here. This isn't some, fantastic new development in Kitimat, which is, the equivalent of a local mall, which is great, but doesn't affect you in Fort St. John. This is $40 billion. And the fact that they're just as excited in Fort St. John as they are in Kitimat tells you sort of the scope of the project we're looking at here.
Yeah, absolutely. They're celebrating apparently tomorrow at a party. She invited me up, but it's a little tough to get in and out of Fort St. John when you live in the Fraser Valley.
But not impossible.
But not impossible. And if there was ever a party to go to, let me tell you, FSJ celebrating liquefied natural gas would be it. All right, who's your hot politician?
Well, I was going to say Kennedy Stewart because he is. He's the front runner in the race to become mayor of Vancouver, and a lot of smart people I talk to think that he is in fact going to win. Kennedy Stewart risked a lot. He was a sitting member of Parliament for the NDP and resigned his seat, to his credit, before running. But that's a six-figure job and a good one. And he was running as an independent, which is also a risky strategy. And some of the other issues, I was going to say until earlier this afternoon, some of the other issues that have bedeviled some of his competitors in terms of things like in-kind donations seem to just bounce off him. He's a bit of Teflon. But today, it actually seems as though he's gotten into some hot water for blocking a lot of journalists on Twitter and for his campaign manager apparently being recorded making threats. So, until 2 hours ago, I was going to say Kennedy Stewart might be the hottest politician in BC politics, but maybe that's not true anymore.
Ooh, are the wheels falling off? I know Mike McDonald sent a little note to us the other day and mentioned that if you took all the left-leaning candidates in the Vancouver mayor's race, they have 52%, and all the right-leaning have 48%. And I think that's probably about right. It tells you what in the polls, just how split that community is. Look, Kennedy Stewart is not a favorite of mine from the moment he, from getting arrested over his foolish Trans Mountain Pipeline stand to claiming that maybe Vancouver didn't want to be a port city anymore. I think this guy is cancer for jobs, and we should be very careful about electing someone named Kennedy Stewart. But what do I know? I live in Langley, not Vancouver, for good reason.
You mentioned him getting arrested. It's funny because that never got mentioned. You almost felt bad for him. Clearly, he did it for the attention, but it was the news reports were all Elizabeth May and maybe another member of Parliament.
Yeah, but, Elizabeth May and some other dude who happened to be in the area.
But Elizabeth May really ate his lunch on that one.
Yeah, well, she has the ability for the stunt that works a little bit better, I guess. All right, cold politicians. I'll give you mine. Mine is Tom Gill, Surrey First candidate, heir apparent to the Surrey First mayoralty legacy. Maclean, I believe, I'm going to go out here 90s early. I'm going to say Tom Gill is going to lose this mayoralty race in Surrey. I believe that Doug McCallum is very likely to win this race. I think part of it is, some of Tom's reputation and voting records. Some of it is people are tired of Surrey First. And some of it is just plain, they're on the wrong side of the people in a number of issues. Surrey folks have come around to the idea that it should be SkyTrain, not light rail, and that more police, tougher on crime is the way to go. Then you have Tom Gill out there talking about warm and fuzzy youth programs and defending light rail. There's a number of scandals as well in City Hall, putting up billboards, promoting light rail in the middle of an election campaign, a mail-in ballot system that seems pretty open to abuse, and there's some investigations into that. If you're Bruce Hayne, where are you? I feel like I should have a milk carton. You're the third person running for council. Where is Bruce Hayne? If you're out there, you should be standing up, press conference, talking about integrity. You're running on a slate called Integrity Now. Get out there, talk about integrity, talk about how you're going to clean up this mess. Otherwise, you just might as well get out of the way or write your concession speech to Doug McCallum.
Well, I won't pretend to have any great insight into Surrey politics, or at least not nowhere near as to the depth of yours. But everything that I have read is exactly in alignment with what you just said, and that even the sympathetic pieces towards Mr. Gill seem to suggest that he might be something of a missed opportunity.
Yeah, look, I have friends in all three camps, and Surrey is a little bit different than well, maybe not. I mean, Tom Gill went out and got endorsed by Mo Sahota, which kind of makes you wonder what's that about. But we have friends in all three camps. Certainly, I think a mix of councillors from the three main campaigns would be good for Surrey. But I think the Surrey First dynasty, which at one time just seemed unassailable, like they were going to reign for 1,000 years, Derek Corrigan-like, that seems to be in its final days. Who's your cold politician?
Well, I mean, it's almost related. It's almost a similar story. My coldest is Gregor Robertson, who, think about Gregor Robertson for a moment. The man, I think, until a couple of years ago, was touted as a future prime minister by some. But barf. I mean, but today in the Sun, he's reduced to sort of apologizing for his record, which is astonishing, defending parts of it, but apologizing for others. I mean, the party that he had turned into what looked like an unbeatable machine almost literally doesn't exist anymore. The natural candidate to succeed him, Shauna Sylvester, bends over backwards to insist that she neither wanted nor sought nor talked to anyone about getting a vision endorsement. No one wants to talk about Gregor, and certainly nobody wants to be endorsed by him. I mean, I've said this before, but you don't have to like or dislike Vision Vancouver to be astonished at watching this well-oiled political machine just fall to pieces in the space of literally weeks. It's been something to see.
Look, it could not have happened to a nicer group of people and a more deserving group of people than Vision Vancouver, who have been some of the most corrosive local politicians we've ever seen in BC history. And I'll tell you what, Gregor Robertson in his heyday, the most overrated mayor in Canadian history. I have very little respect for him. The thing, I know you live on the island, so you don't see the dynamic here, but Gregor Robertson and his council have made it so difficult for anyone outside of Vancouver to go into Vancouver. Mm-hmm. You wonder why attendance is down at BC Lions games? Gregor Robertson made it that way. You want to know why attendance is down at Canuck games? Well, they suck, but also because they made it that way. It is so hard to get into town. It's expensive. If you drive in, if you take whatever it is, it's expensive, it's costly, and they make it so difficult. I can't believe any of these businesses downtown have managed to just survive, especially in the service industry. There's boarded up storefronts all over the place. Gregor Robertson's been frankly, an unmitigated disaster. My biggest fear, though, is that the reason Vision is falling apart is because the brains behind the operation, Jeff Meggs, has moved to Victoria to run the John Horgan shop.
As you may recall, on the Orca, we had a great interview with outgoing councillor George Affleck, who echoed a couple of those concerns, including that a lot of their brain trust has either gone to Ottawa to work for the Prime Minister or to here in Victoria to work for John Horgan, and so I think there's something to that. He also brought up something that I always find disappointing with municipal politicians, and that's, and I think it might be fair to say Gregor might have done this more than most, is that he had a real focus on national and provincial and sometimes even global issues. That's not the job. And it's fine to have a view on these things, but I mean, to the exclusion of fixing roads and potholes and all those things that all the very good and important work that municipal politicians are elected to do. Gregor at times seemed almost uninterested in that stuff. And again, whether you like him or not, that was very disappointing. And it's frustrating you see municipal politicians of any stripe anywhere in the province do that.
Yeah, you saw it in his travel expenses, running off to see Pope Francis, while lecturing us about the dangers of climate change and carbon emissions. Like, just unbelievable the kind of things he's done. So I say happy trails, Gregor Robertson. Don't let the door hit you on the way out. And why don't you take some of your dozens of communications, political communications staffers out of City Hall with you. Save the new mayor the time of having to whack them when they get elected. I know what you're thinking, Maclean. You're thinking, gosh, I wish these Hotstove, I wish Jordan would just show more opinions on the politics of the day and just speak his mind.
You are very restrained. It's we're gonna get you out of your shell one of these days. We're gonna keep coaxing you.
I'm just going to say what I think, apparently think what I say. All right. The Ledge was not sitting this week. It's back in session Monday. Any hints as to, I think cannabis is on the agenda probably.
Well, yeah, I mean, if we're talking about anything else, I'll be surprised. Look, we talked about it earlier in the show. It's happening on Tuesday. It's a thing that Ottawa dictated, and so we're on federal timelines, but it's a provincial jurisdiction, and whether or not they have the resources or not, I think even the NDP would publicly concede that there are things that they are not ready for and haven't thought of yet. And I mean, again, that's not even necessarily their fault. I think any government would struggle with the biggest societal shift since Prohibition. There are things I think they could have done much better, and we'll see the results of that in the coming weeks. But on the whole, I can't imagine. It'll be difficult for any other issue to have oxygen next week.
Do you think any politician is brave enough to go out there and toke up on Wednesday?
That is such a great question. Wow.
Would that be the kind of photo op?
I mean, no
one's going to do it, right?
It's one of those. I can't decide if it would either be one of and I don't want to name any names, but it would be one of the usual suspects you're thinking of who probably already does it on the side, or it'll be sort of one of those only Nixon can go to China moments it'll be somebody who you would never suspect.
Shirley Bond. There you go.
Yeah, maybe. That would be surprising, and I would step out to take a picture of that. I would do that.
I would insist you do. So watch that. I can't imagine. I'm trying to think of a hip millennial politician who might be dumb enough to do it. It's still such a touchy issue with so many people.
A hip millennial politician. I mean, Ravi Kalon's a millennial, but he's also an Olympian, so I doubt he smokes. And I'm struggling to think of who would do that.
Gregor might.
Well, Gregor might, but Gregor's going to have a lot of time on his hands soon, so he can do whatever he wants.
That's right. He's 3 days before the election. Why not? Why not? All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, if there is a politician out there who you see legally toking up, please send that picture and link to Maclean and I, because we will mention it on next week's Hotstove. Anything else?
Unless you see them doing it before Tuesday, in which case CC the police.
Yes. yeah. If you get arrested Monday night, and you get released Tuesday morning, that'll really suck. So
if you're craving it at 11:50 at night on Monday, please just wait the 10 minutes.
If the rumors of the shortage are true, don't wait till the weekend to load up. You make sure you get down there on Wednesday and take care of yourself. All right, that's it for the BC Poly Hotstove for another week. We will see you next week. By the way, all of these Off the Cuff videos and the Hotstove are available as audio podcasts in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Just search for The Orca. There we go. This is it. All right. Everyone have a good weekend, and we will touch base with you next week.
Thanks for